everyone knew exactly when I asked, okay, what do you see as the events and incidents? What happened in your life that led you to do this work? And no one had any trouble. Exact memories and experiences that they knew brought them along, to that point. So I found that pretty amazing.
Keep watching to learn more. For early access to our videos and live stream events, sign up for our free weekly newsletter at newthinkingaloud.org. New Thinking Aloud is presented by the California Institute for Human Science, a fully accredited university offering distant learning graduate degrees that focus on mind, body, and spirit. The topics that we cover here. We are particularly excited to announce new degrees emphasizing parapsychology and the paranormal. Visit their website at cihs.edu.
Book 4 in the New Thinking Aloud dialogue series is Charles T. Tart, 70 Years of Exploring Consciousness and Parapsychology, now available on Amazon.
Thinking Aloud. Conversations on the leading edge of knowledge and discovery with psychologist Jeffrey Mishlove.
Hello and welcome. I'm Jeffrey Mishlove. Today we'll be exploring life journeys of 21st century spiritual healers. In fact, that is the title of a book and doctoral dissertation by my guest, Dr. Mary Baxter, who is an intuitive consultant, author of Life Journeys of 21st Century Spiritual Healers, and also Getting Started with Your Pendulum. She received her doctoral degree for this research from the California Institute of Integral Studies. Once again, this is an internet interview, and now I'll switch over to the internet video. Hello, Mary. It's good to be with you once again.
Good to be with you too, Jeffrey.
And today we're going to talk about really what was your specialty, the subject that you spent, I'm sure, years studying in your doctoral work. How is it that people living in these modern times end up choosing a career as a spiritual healer?
Yes, because it's not your everyday typical thing. Nobody mentions it as a career in the high school guidance counselor office.
Yeah, and as a matter of fact, though, it's a very ancient tradition. I mean, people say that shamans are probably the world's oldest profession.
When I started the study, one of the most interesting readings I did was Gene Achterberg wrote a book on healers and pointed out that all healing was spiritual healing until the Newtonian transformation in science. And up until that point, there were always some sort of, calling in of spirit in some way for anyone working with healing.
In fact, as I recall reading your book, most of the earliest healers, it seems, were women.
Yes. Yeah, it was definite because of the caring. It's the difference between healers and technicians. And I think Western medicine is very technical and, trains technicians in modalities, chemical healing and so forth. But the healer aspect often isn't there. It's like when people go into teaching, teachers there's something within them that causes a wanting to teach. And I think that's the case with healers. And women are more naturally the loving caretakers in humanity.
You point out, for example, that for most of human history, if we go back maybe over 1 million years, humans lived in goddess cultures.
Yes. There's so much research that was done. Gimbutas, I think is how we say her name. I've read her work, and archaeology, like digging things up, finding artifacts in rivers and so forth, really shows a history in and out of what characterized healing or the health of people by what they left behind. Big differences between ruling classes and the artifacts they left behind, and the peasant class and what was left behind, the condition of their bones, all that kind of thing. Really fascinating. And all of these artifacts were found that had these goddess figures and symbols that just really show that this was where people were looking. It was the nature. The natural world is very associated with the feminine energy.
During the Middle Ages, and even up almost to modern times, there has been sort of this idea of witchcraft, and witches are dangerous and witches are evil. But you point out that there's some scholarship suggesting that a lot of witchcraft, even into contemporary times, is something of a revival of the ancient goddess culture.
It is. And I think, different words get connotations that just seem negative, and definitely witches and practicing witchcraft sounds very dark to many people, like, oh, definitely something to be avoided. And yet, in the Middle Ages, and as like the Reformation of the church, and where there was, the witch hunts and the terrible femicide that occurred during those times, was really identifying healers and herbalists who had the herbs, they had the drugs that relieved pain and could do things that you needed training. You needed to learn how to do these things. And they were characterized as witches at that time. And politically, what I found in my research, and also because of this perspective I was looking at, this was a concerted effort of the church, which was male, to take over. They were the original scientists that, were in this organization, and wanting to take over the art of healing, wanted to be the medical profession. And so to demonize the practitioners who were women, this is even done today. If you want to get people to not look at something, you immediately make it sound extremely negative. If ridicule doesn't get rid of it, then you go after it with a vengeance. And this is, I think, what really happened to women healers.
And I found it fascinating that you pointed out that there was a time around the turn of the 20th century when there was a real effort to bring women into medicine, and many women became doctors, and then it was shut down again.
Then there was a tremendous backlash in that way for women not being allowed in schools. And even when they were, there was nowhere for them to go and practice or be interns. They would even have to go, like in the United States, they would have to go. There were certain schools, 1 or 2 open in Europe, but it was very difficult. Why? I wonder why that is. Just a rough road, I think, for women to hold on to something that comes so naturally to them, to be healers.
One of the things that really struck me going through your work is that the lives of women, the life histories of women, seemed in your presentation to be riddled with difficulties and trouble, things often having to do with what it's like to be a woman, that often men have a different experience.
Yeah, men and women do have different experiences. And for me, that was very interesting. And being a woman, experienced it more as I grew up and got older. But I remember as a child, and just not getting it, like there is no difference. And at one point when I realized it, I wanted to be a boy. I wanted to be Timmy on the TV program Rin Tin Tin. He got to do such cool things. And I remember telling my mother this because I wanted that freedom that I saw in my brother, which was very different than what I was experiencing right in the same family. And in this research, particularly women who were in very rigid Christian churches, Mormon, Amish, but some combinations of religions that were also comprised their lives, like their whole community of what they grew up in, experienced like repression. They were not expected to become educated. They were expected to get married very young and start having children. And one of them says, stand by your man, no matter if he was out, had left you and was out doing drugs and being with other women and experiencing life without you. There was no acknowledgement. And so women were thrown out of their communities as bad people because they were just training to become a nurse, so they would have an ability to give a life to their child. So that was kind of alarming to me. But very real as something that can be experienced. People had in this research issues with religion, or it seemed to give them some light in their lives where they found ritual and at least this acknowledgement that there was something more than the physical world that they could connect with. And so everyone knew exactly when I asked, okay, what do you see as the events and incidents? What happened in your life that led you to do this work? And no one had any trouble. Exact memories and experiences that they knew brought them along, to that point. So I found that pretty amazing. And I loved it. I just loved it. People know.
Now, in some of the classical literature of shamanism, it's talked, shamans are described as individuals who go through a crisis and then they learn to heal themselves. And in the process of healing themselves in the middle of a terrible, often deathly crisis, they become shamans. And I noticed a very similar pattern in the healers that you wrote about.
Yeah, I think that as each of these women went through their lives, and some had pretty shocking experiences of being manipulated or being abused throughout their lives or at key points, and some giving up, one just calling out loud, like, what is this about? Please help me. And receiving that help in a spiritual way, seeing angels, not incarnated beings, hearing voices that loved them and offered them help. And they knew it wasn't a negative thing. It wasn't anything to be afraid of. It gave them hope. And so this whole idea, and even throughout their lives where different things would happen, there was a sense of that there was a point to it all, that they weren't alone, and that no one wallowed in it and stayed feeling victimized. Because they were, in victim situations, some people will stay there and use that, I'm this way because, and then that's it. That's, a limit to what they're going to do in their lives. But none of these people had that experience. They came out of it with, I think it gave such empathy for others. There's an understanding for what other people go through that makes it possible to offer healing, because compassion and empathy are such a big part of helping someone heal themselves, because that's where it goes, is accepting that there's a way and being able to do that. Healers help you heal yourself. They don't do something to you.
I think it's useful when we talk about spiritual healing, maybe to try and define it a little more, because in one sense, it might be thought of healing of the spirit. That's probably the most important part of it. But I think most spiritual healers are also known for dealing with physical illness.
Well, often that's what puts a person in a desperate state. They have intense pain. They're given a diagnosis of a potentially deadly illness, and they're going through things to heal using common methods or the prescribed methods, but nothing's getting better. And so I think it's more out of desperation that people seek out spiritual healing. And often it's a mental, psychological experience. It doesn't just have to be physical. Like, I think all energy healers, which could be, there are many people who practice forms of energy healing, like Reiki, quantum touch, and so forth, that may not talk about spirit so much, but they're dealing with the field around you, giving that idea that something is happening beyond the physical. And what I've really learned, and I believe this, that everything is really happening in the invisible before it takes root into our physical experience. If you think, I think science has identified 11 dimensions, and we're in the third dimension. These bodies are in the third dimension being affected by what is happening. So we have these subtle bodies. We have a chakra system. All of these are identified in energy healing or Eastern medicine, Chinese medicine, the meridians and so forth. So it's not foreign to think of energy healing. And the spiritual part comes in if we can identify that we have a soul, that we have a spirit aspect to ourselves. And healing at that level, what I find, reaches right into the physical body. It cannot help but change what is there unless someone holds on to it, or something has moved so far into the body that it could be difficult. Yet people experience miracles. There are these psychic surgeons out there that do all kinds of things and remove stuff from bodies. To me, very bizarre. And yet I can't judge it. I haven't experienced it. And experiencing what I do in healing it is just miraculous. It is amazing what happens. So an openness to something else is beneficial, I think.
Well, since you brought up the subject of psychic surgery, I did do an interview with James McLennan, a sociologist who studied the phenomenon extensively, and as others have, and I'm told by these people that there's a lot of fraud going on. Well, actually, fraud may not be the best word, but tricks. That shamans who do that often seem to find that if you can do a little sleight of hand and pull out a chicken liver and tell somebody you're removing an illness from them, it puts them into a state of awe. And that state of awe may be actually conducive to real healing. It seems to me that this is something that shamans have been doing for a long time. But and I'm fascinated. I know there are some medical doctors who have looked into psychic surgery and do feel that it is quite legitimate. Andrea Puharich, a surgeon at the University of New York at the time, wrote a book about a psychic surgeon from Brazil who operated on him personally. So I think it's a mixed bag.
I think that the idea of fraud, it can exist everywhere. Including in very traditional medical procedures and doctor's appointments and so forth. But particularly when you're dealing with spiritual healing or energy healing, it's something I think people have to look out for. It is, you may be in fear. And, if you're in fear, you can be very susceptible. When I started doing this work, that's what really came to my attention. And I hear about it all the time where people are afraid, are afraid of being tricked. And there are signs. If, you could go to someone for a simple psychic reading and a little tidbit is laid out of something to be afraid of and being hit up for enormous amounts of money. I've had people come to me telling me they've paid someone $40,000, $70,000 to remove a curse. And they're still, experiencing these things and they can't get a hold of the person. That's, I think, terrible. Don't do that. This is not the way I work, and nor anyone in the study. There's an exchange of money going on because it takes time. If it's your profession, if it's your work, there's a need to be compensated, but not at extraordinary amounts, having no effects and based on fear. I think anytime if you go to someone and they keep planting fear, go away from that person, or if they are. I recently had someone call me who I worked with and taught this method of healing and so forth. And I just was so shocked that he now was identifying him as like the second coming of Christ and very grandiose channelings and so forth. It was very sad to hear. And also to find out somewhat what was happening in his personal life where he had become very abusive. So this is not a healer, I think you can only practice healing to the extent that you have healed.
Well, you describe in your own life, I have to say, of the various crises people have gone through in the process of becoming a healer. Your own story is about as dramatic as any I've ever read. It seemed as if you were having simultaneous crises with your children, with your partner, and with your property all at once.
That particular circumstance, going through it, was just incredible. And I didn't see any way. I did not understand it at all. I couldn't understand it, but I could believe it because it was unrolling right in front of me. And the method that changed it all was the soul clearing and property clearing. And it was the clearing, the identification of presence, of entities, of history that had happened on that land, combined with similar information about me, my partner, my children at the time, all coming together like in this incredible storm, that I would not wish on anyone. And in hindsight, it's great that it's in the past. And while that was such an experience, out of it came this beautiful healing, this finding of what for me was my life purpose that I wasn't finding in typical, going to grad school, learning to become a psychologist. I wasn't doing it for me. And when this happened and this way of being, this way of healing was experienced, I knew that was why I had that experience. How else would I have found it? And who knows, maybe I would have found it in some more gentle way later. But that's what happened. Even though there was this seeming like miraculous transformation of that property, the relationships in the family, it didn't stay like that. As time went on, there would be eruptions that I would look at, like, how could this be happening? And so I really learned from all of that to grow, that there were changes I was very reluctant to make that eventually simply had to be made. And, I think that's part of the learning process of not only learning to heal others, but having to heal myself. I think as a healer, you only have the capacity to heal for others as much as you are able to do it for yourself, or you just don't understand. You don't know.
And in all of the healers that you've written about, the 10 you studied and 3 others I know that you have included biographical information of, it seems as if one of the consistent patterns is this overcoming of crisis. And on occasion, it's not just one crisis, it's a series of repeated crises without falling victim to them, at least for long.
Yeah. I think that is really key, that I remember feeling like a victim, and I knew who my victimizer was. And that was a big part of my identity for a long time as I went through that. And I was really helped by, it irritated me to hear someone say to me, well, you're not a victim in this situation. And yet that stuck with me, because how could that be said? And then learning and realizing what was I choosing? What was I doing that was keeping me in that situation? And it can be really scary, very difficult to make the changes that we need to make to get out of those kinds of circumstances. But it can be done. And then once we do it, we have a whole new set of things that we understand and can offer to others. For many years, as I worked as a healer, what I knew how to do for women in difficult relationships was how to stay in it and be calm, how to function within that dysfunction. And not until I broke out of that and let it go and did a whole other level of my life opened up. And also my healing practice just exploded, because I think people want to learn how to really transform their lives and not just how to kind of deal in really difficult. If you can get out of something, very good. If you cannot, you learn how to live within it. And we all have different opportunities.
It seems to me that one of the crucial issues for a spiritual healer has to do with stigma, self-esteem, and sort of living on the margins of society. Just this week, I released a video with one of my oldest and dearest friends, who is now a spiritualist minister who spent 7 years in prison. And he talked very openly about what that time in prison meant to him, and how, in his particular case, it was an opportunity to meditate and to actually achieve a state of oneness, which led to very dramatic transformations in his life. But these are things that some people can never get over the embarrassment of.
Nelson Mandela, look at what happens to this person and the life and what he became. Malcolm X, famous people who spent time in prison. You can stay a victim of it and just feel really bad, and other people just create so much beauty and have so much to offer coming from that experience. That's healing. That's being a healer.
But in other words, there's a conflict between the social milieu that the individual is in and their own sense of their budding, let's call it, spiritual gift.
Yes. And if they are actually, some of these women heard spirit encouraging them and letting them know that they were safe and on the right path. And this was very, very helpful. For me, I did have this experience of negative voices in my head, very alarming experience in my early 20s. And I knew this wasn't necessarily what was happening to other people, but I was pretty open about it, and I talked about it to be sure, and was finding out from people I was close to that no, they were not having these kinds of experiences. So I knew to get some help with that, and I really did through a traditional psychiatrist. But what was interesting was she offered me medication. Yeah, I think it's a common thing right away for that type of symptom. But I didn't want that. I just knew I didn't want that. And I remember a few sessions in, her name, Dr. Goldman. I don't think she's around with us any longer. But a few sessions in, she said to me, Mary, if you don't want to hear those voices, I think you could just tell them to stop and leave you alone. And I was very surprised because I had tried interacting, being friendly. I mean, these were more my ways of doing things rather than setting boundaries. And so I actually did that, and that was the end of it. It never happened to me again. And that was very, very wonderful. At the same time, it also closed down a part of me that had been more open to light and positive messages, a sense of that. And so that experience on the farm and going through that and having that healing through the soul clearing, it just cracked my heart open. I could still feel it. It was just like, wow, this is here. This is present. And I can connect with that without having to close it all down. And so that was a really important part of the beginning of my path in learning to do healing in this way.
I used to know Wilson Van Dusen, who was the chief psychologist at Napa State Hospital in California, working with, people who had been hospitalized for decades. He wrote a book called The Presence of Spirits in the World of Madness, and based on the writings of Swedenborg, how sometimes we think people are experiencing psychosis using the medical model, whereas a spiritual model might suggest a completely different way to look at this, that there are, in his words, good spirits and bad spirits, and the people who were plagued by bad spirits also had good spirits who were trying to help them.
It's very interesting. I love his work and writing about Swedenborg, and who lived at a time when he could openly talk about his interdimensional experiences, viewing heaven, viewing hell, being taken on tours by angels. And, a Renaissance man, he could do everything. He could make a clock, as well as understand intricate crafts and do them. He could do that. And to be open, young, he listened to his patients that were in these hospitals. And that's how he also, had a lot of interaction with, beings that weren't physical, but he could see them and hear them. And I even wonder, when he came up with the collective unconscious and his whole explanation, if that just wasn't a better way of bringing semi-acceptable information forward into psychiatry at that time, because he could have explained it in many other ways. Having had those experiences. And he wondered, he even says, in his journal, the Red Book, that he was worried, am I doing schizophrenia? He asks himself, through having these experiences. So it's pretty amazing to me that with openness, we find out many people are having experiences that bring them comfort, that come from beyond their day-to-day lives, that they feel a presence, that there's something there. And why not use that and acknowledge it if it comes to you as your purpose, which it did to me.
I understand from our previous interview what came to you was working with guides and angels. Yes, they were right there. And I presume that this is true of many of the other healers you've studied.
Yes, they talk about they have a team that they are working with that brings them information and helps them understand what's going on so they can explain it to the people that they're working with and give people the ability to connect with their own guidance. I think that's the most important thing is if I can help someone understand that they have guidance within them, that they can tap into. One of my classes that I really focus on is called Inner Wisdom, how to connect into that, like moment to moment, and live in a way that you're not in fear, but you're connected with this higher part of yourself. If you believe in angels, there will be angels, spirit guides to me, are angels that if you recognize that they're there and very easy to communicate with, and that we have ways we can do that and really be confident about what we're being guided to do, it's a great way to live. Especially if you have problems and issues and are going through things, meaning you are human, to have that help. And I think we get that help because being human is very difficult.
I think another characteristic that you've written about, which seems important, is the idea of having somewhere a supportive community, or at least one other person who can acknowledge and the depths within one, where other people might be labeling you as a deviant or a crazy person. At least one other human being can recognize that there's a potential spiritual gift there.
People are having these experiences. Maybe if we don't treat them as a serious illness and try to medicate it out of them or isolate them and get them away from society, but maybe if we help them through it, understand it, and help them through it. Like, okay, go ahead and have this experience. You're safe in this environment. You come out of it having grown and being whole, being more whole rather than pushing it all down. I know that was my experience, that as people helped me through what I was experiencing and knowing there could be a community, that made such a difference.
Mary Baxter, it's been a real pleasure once again having this heartfelt conversation. I think there may be thousands of people out there whose lives can be touched by a discussion like this. I know some of the greatest healers and inspiring people that I've ever experienced had gone through periods of being really dejected and feeling rejected. And when one person reaches out and acknowledges them, it makes a huge difference. So I think this video is likely to have that impact. So thank you so much for being with me once again. And also, I want to let our viewers know we're going to have another discussion on how to use a pendulum, which is a very important technique in your own work.
Yes, it is. I look forward to that. And thank you so much for today. Wonderful.
For early access to our videos and live stream events, sign up for our free weekly newsletter at newthinkingaloud.org. You can now download all 8 copies of the New Thinking Aloud magazine for free, or order beautiful printed copies. Go to newthinkingaloud.org. New Thinking Aloud is presented by the California Institute for Human Science, a fully accredited university offering distant learning graduate degrees that focus on mind, body, and spirit. The topics that we cover here. We are particularly excited to announce new degrees emphasizing parapsychology and the paranormal. Visit their website at cihs.edu.
Book 4 in the New Thinking Aloud dialogue series is Charles T. Tart, 70 Years of Exploring Consciousness and Parapsychology, now available on Amazon.